Good evening, everyone. It's my honor to introduce our speaker this evening, Master Richard Whittam. Richard is going to talk to you about, on this topic, does sport need independent regulation? If so, what is the role of the advocate? Richard's experience is massive. He was the first senior Treasury counsel. He's obviously a silk, a bencher, a deputy High Court judge. In fact, he's a Justice of Appeal in the Court of Appeal of the Falkland Islands and the South Georgia and the Sandwich Islands, which must be quite interesting, I suppose. But anyway, he's going to speak to you this evening on, as I say, regulation and sports law. And of course, he's an expert in that. He's in all the directories, and if they were allowed to, I'm sure they would give him an Oscar. But anyway, I'll pass over to Richard now. Thank you.
Thank you, Master Treasurer. I was rather intimidated when I got this invitation, and I must admit it feels a bit like being a referee at Old Trafford who's just given Liverpool a penalty in front of the Stretford end, seeing you all staring at me as you are. In those heady days before the first lockdown, as I walked across a park, I saw some children playing football. Jumpers dumped on the grass to make the goalposts, and I smiled at this particular exchange. After a long-range shot, well, a long-range shot for a 9-year-old anyway, went whistling over or between the jumpers. The player who shot claimed a goal. The player who was somewhat forlornly trudging back to the bushes where the ball had ended up turned round and gestured. What an influence television has had on our appreciation and understanding of sport. We are more enabled to form our own views about what we've seen and express our opinions about it. Sport is an important part of the social and economic fabric of our society. Enthusiasm may wax and wane, waxing, for example, significantly after the successful Olympics in London in 2012. But some of the figures are remarkable, aren't they? The England against Italy Euro 2020 final was the most watched event in UK broadcasting history. 31 million viewed on television and a further 11 million that followed the game online. That doesn't include all of you, those who watch the events in the pub or in other groups. Premiership football attracts 15 million spectators a year, with over 11 million spectators watching the championship matches. That's the largest second division in Europe. The second most attended sport? Horse racing. Some 6 million people attend horse racing meetings annually. The horse racing industry is worth about £4.1 billion and supports tens of thousands of jobs. Nearly 300,000 people play cricket regularly. There are nearly 140,000 rugby union players registered in England alone. The worldwide television audience for the Rugby World Cup in 2019 in Japan was reputed to be 857 million people. Lies, damned lies, and statistics. Certainly I watched more than one game, so I'm not quite sure how that figure was worked out. Hockey's not far behind rugby. Some 120,000 registered players. And netball now has 76,000 registered players and the growing following since the televised Super League. What's the relevance of those figures? Because with that level of participation comes responsibility. What kind of responsibility and to whom? Well, I won't list all of them. But obviously, at the heart of the responsibility is the responsibility to the participants. Safeguarding. Discrimination of any sort, whether by race, gender, sex, or sexuality. Physical safety. Mental well-being. on-field discipline, doping. What about the spectators? Safety is at the forefront of most people's mind. The broader fan base, good governance and regulation. What of good governance? Fit and proper test for ownership. Corruption, gambling, regulation of agents. Well, what's the government responsibility if there should be independent regulation? Before most of your time, the first Minister for Sport was Dennis Howell, appointed first by Harold Wilson in 1964. He was a politician of many talents. He was reappointed after the general election in 1974. In August 1976, during the drought, he was made the Minister for Drought. The appointment didn't last for very long, because days after he was appointed, there was widespread rainfall, and he was appointed Minister for Floods. In 1978, he was appointed Minister for Snow. In 1992, John Major established the Secretary of State for National Heritage, which in 1997 morphed into the Secretary of State for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, most commonly referred to now as the Culture Secretary. I shall return to government responsibility after I've considered just a few of the independent reports that have been commissioned in recent years and how some sports have approached governance issues. It must be remembered that some events transcend sport, though. The fire in the stand at Bradford City on the 11th of May 1985 killed 56 spectators. The disaster at Hillsborough Stadium on the 15th of April 1989 resulted in 97 people losing their lives and many hundreds more being injured. So, of the first question posed, does sport need independent regulation? Well, quite a lot has happened since the 25th of September, when I accepted the invitation to give this address. In October, Azim Rafiq received a copy of a redacted report commissioned by Yorkshire Cricket Club. I shall return to that report shortly. In November, Tracy Crouch's independent FAD-led review of football governance was completed. The general contents have been known since the summer. She proposes that there should be external governance of football. I shall return to her report shortly as well. What I'm not going to do is answer the first question for you. It's for you to consider, within the topic of you furthering your legal education and considering justice and the rule of law. There are different levels of regulation and different topics within those levels. What do I mean by the level of regulation in sport? Does it mean complete oversight of every aspect of that sport? Does it mean a national oversight, an international oversight? And what do I mean by topics? Well, I've already listed many of them, including discrimination of any sort, financial governance, doping, off-field offending, and on-field offending. Well, what of Yorkshire? Much has been played out in the media. Some of you will have seen on the 16th of November, Azim Rafiq giving his moving account of what he'd suffered. What had been the path of Yorkshire up to that point? Well, he made his allegations in the summer of 2020. The allegations were of institutional racism against the club during both his spells there, in 2008 and 2018. Yorkshire asked an independent law firm to investigate. They received the report in August 2021, but they didn't release any part of the report for a month, and when they did, it was heavily redacted. After holding their own review into the matter, the club accepted that there was no question that he had been the victim of racial harassment and bullying. It had held only 7 of the 40 allegations made by him, some not being upheld on the grounds of insufficient evidence. In October, he received a copy of the redacted report. Yorkshire said its own internal investigation concluded that there is no conduct or action taken by any of its employees, players or executives that warrants disciplinary action. Rafiq responded by describing that reaction as embarrassing and accused the club of having shown the green light to racism. Meanwhile, the England and Wales Cricket Board said it would now look into the report as part of its own investigations. In November, it was reported that the as yet unpublished report from the club referred to the comments made as friendly banter. Shortly after that, the Emerald Group Publishing, the primary commercial partners who held the naming rights for Headingley Stadium, Yorkshire Tea, and joined with the shirt sponsors Anchor Butter, in ending their association with the team because of what had happened. The following day, Nike announced it will no longer be the kit sponsor, while Harrogate Springwater terminated its contract with the club. On the 4th of November, Yorkshire was suspended from hosting international and major matches as the England-Wales Cricket Board delivered stinging rebuke to the club's wholly unacceptable handling of the racism claims. The ECB convened to discuss what was fast becoming a crisis, admitting in a statement the abhorrent matter is causing serious damage to the reputation of the game. In a statement, they said, there is no place for racism of any form or discrimination in cricket, and where it is found, swift action must be taken. The Leeds Beckett University paused all current planned activity with Yorkshire, saying the club's public statements to date suggest that its approach to the handling of these accusations is inconsistent with our values and culture. The chair and the CEO resigned. Lord Kamlesh Patel was appointed as the new chair and director on the 5th of November. As I've said, it was the 16th of November when he appeared before the select committee. Since then, bearing in mind nobody was supposed to be subject to any disciplinary action, the director of cricket and coach have left, as has the entire coaching team. I don't have enough time to devote to these sorry events. Food for thought, though. What caused Yorkshire belatedly to take the matter seriously? Was it the independent report? Was it its own inadequate handling of the response to that report? Was it the economic consequences as a result of the sponsors' reactions? Or was it as a result of the ECB withdrawing the prestigious and financially lucrative test matches? Or was it as a result of his appearance before the committee? Football. On the 24th of November, Tracy Crouch published the fan-led review for football governance. In summary, there were a number of recommendations made. A, to ensure the long-term sustainability of football, the government should create a new independent regulator for English football. B, to ensure financial sustainability for the professional game, the regulator should oversee financial regulation in football. C, new owners and directors tests for clubs should be established. The regulator replacing the 3 existing tests and ensuring that only good custodians and qualified directors can run these vital assets. D, football needs a new approach to corporate governance to support long-term sustainable future of the game. E, football needs to improve equality, diversity and inclusion in clubs and committed EDI action plans regularly assessed by the regulator. F, a uniquely important stakeholder, supporters should be properly consulted by their clubs in taking key decisions by means of a shadow board. G, football clubs are a vital part of their local communities. In recognition of this, there should be additional protection for key items of club heritage. It goes on. What's interesting, though, in that clear endorsement, there should be an independent regulator, and accepted by Julian Knight, who's the chair of the select committee, with these words: for too long, professional football in this country has operated with a disregard for fans and for the most basic good business practice. We welcome the review's central recommendation for an independent football regulator, with accountability to the committee to assess performance and value for money. A shadow board of fans with the golden sharing clubs will put paid to ridiculous harebrained schemes such as the European Super League. New owners and directors tests and a transfer levy to benefit grassroots clubs are all moves in the right direction. What we need now is urgent government action with a bill before the House. The Secretary of State must look to introduce a football regulator in the next Queen's speech. We can have no further prevarication, nor see these recommendations shunted into a future election manifesto. Today must mark the start of building a stronger, fairer and more sustainable national game. I pause to comment and I express no view, but make this observation. Although the report does criticise the Premier League, some of us can remember its formation in 1992. At one moment, it is the jewel in the crown. It's come a long way since it was established. When it was founded amongst much criticism, rather like the European Super League. Interestingly, though, with what appears to be that resounding endorsement of an entirely independent regulator overseeing football. In fact, in her letter setting out how the report was progressing, she said this: "I've stated publicly that there is a strong case for a new independent regulator, and I've heard nothing in evidence that has dissuaded me from this view. I believe that the independent regulator should be established to address issues that are most relevant to the risks to the game, and already at least partially as a matter of English law, particularly financial regulation, corporate governance and ownership. The related requirements are likely to include cost controls, real-time financial monitoring, minimum governance requirements, including a requirement for independent non-executive directors on club boards, and revised separate tests for owners and directors of club on an initial and ongoing basis. However, I do not believe the regulator should cover football issues, such as the running of league competitions, video technology, the national game, Wembley Stadium, the delivery of grassroots strategy, and other such matters which should remain with the existing bodies. It may also be that, at some point in the future, a substantially reformed FA could absorb the functions of the regulator. The evidence received indicates that possibility is some way off. So, football could remain with the FA. In the future, a substantially reformed FA could absorb the functions of the independent regulator. So is it a permanent regulator that's needed? Or should sport's own system of regulation be fit for purpose? Many sports have commissioned independent reports, not least into the historic allegations of sexual misconduct. I'm not going to go through those additional reports. They covered football, tennis, we know about things in gymnastics, all adopted by those who received the reports. Interestingly, the reports were by, the ones that I've referred to in passing, all by Queen's Counsel, independent members of the bar called in to do those investigations. Horse racing has reappointed Master Brian Barker as its chairman of independent judicial panel, looking into how things should be addressed. So there's a bit of a tension between an overall regulator that deals with everything, or somebody who's making sure that good governance is complied with. Some of you may have heard of Sports Resolutions. It's a UK-based, independent, not-for-profit dispute resolution service for sport operating globally, offering arbitration, mediation, tribunal and expert opinion. It was established by the main stakeholder groups in sport. The aim was to provide an expert, speedy and cost-effective alternative to internal appeals and court-based litigation. It provides sport-specific arbitration and mediation services and operates the National Anti-Doping Panel and the National Safeguarding Panel. I won't deal with all its achievements, but its resolve around 1,500 disputes across 40 sports in the past 10 years. It's received 300 requests for help each year, which leads to some 180 cases being resolved by arbitration or mediation. It resolved 40 athletes' selection disputes before the Commonwealth, Olympic and Paralympic Games. It's resolved over 250 anti-doping disputes since 2007, of which 80 were cases for international federations. I could go on more. The point is, it's an established, recognised body. Members of the bar are appointed to the sports resolutions of specialist advocate panels on merit. There is therefore a role for the advocate. But what is that role? Advocacy in sport regulation involves both written and oral advocacy. Outside the debate about overall regulation, there remains the topic-based regulation that ordinarily is overseen by organisational bodies, whether national or international. The Premier League, the FA, FIFA, UEFA, the RFU, and World Rugby, to name but a few. I've referred to some of the independent reports commissioned by the FA and the Lawn Tennis Association. Regular discipline hearings are held in relation to both on and off-field misconduct. The RFU, the Premier League and the FA have in-house counsel to conduct hearings on their behalf. A former pupil of mine was the head of discipline at the RFU. He moved to Australia with his Australian wife and their children. Shortly after they moved, as a matter of luck, the position as the head of ethics at Rugby Australia became vacant. He was successful in his application. Some unkind people are on the eve of the ashes, and bearing in mind what happened in Sandpapergate, have queried him as to quite what the size of the head of ethics of Rugby Australia, the size of the task he has to deal with. His predecessor, though, was rather caught out. He moved from Rugby Australia to be the head of discipline at Cricket Australia almost immediately before Sandpapergate. But it's interesting, isn't it? So that there was an independent inquiry into what happened at Sandpapergate, so cheating, sandpapering balls in test matches. Steve Smith, who might remember breaking down on television, crying as to what had happened. Well, Australia have lost yet another captain. Steve Smith is now almost rehabilitated. He's now being appointed as their vice captain, having lost his captaincy 3 years ago. There's a wide variety of cases heard in individual sports. My principal experience is sitting as a member of the RFU Independent Judiciary. There's a clue in the title. Just like sitting in any other area, whether as a recorder, a deputy high court judge or anything else, it's the independent bit that matters. The cases vary. I was on the panel that dealt with the Barbarians team that breached the COVID regulations. There was a disregard by 13 players. While we were all complying with the rules, they were not. It caused the cancellation of the match. It was to have been the highlight of the careers for some of the Fijian players who'd been invited to play. It was a match that was to be in the memory of Matt Ratner, the policeman who was shot dead in the custody suite in South London. Great significance to other people, not just the selfish players that decided they could go out drinking. There was quite a lot of work, though. 7 members of the bar represented the players and 1 the RFU. 4 Queen's Counsel were engaged. Written and oral submissions were received. There were some difficult decisions to make and some interesting submissions. The players were on duty for an invitation club, the Barbarians. Any sanction or suspension that affected their players hit their home club. One club had provided 5 players. But they weren't representing their clubs at the time they committed the indiscretion. So there had to be a balance as to what sanction could be imposed that hit hold immediately, but wasn't unduly burdensome on the clubs. Racism. In one case I dealt with, a player had retreated retweeted a racist message about George Floyd during the trial of the policeman accused of his murder. The RFU were represented by independent counsel. The player accepted that he committed an offence prejudicial to the union and the game. It was inevitable that he would receive a significant sanction. Part of the sanction, which had been set out in written submissions and expanded on at the hearing, was for him to attend an anti-racism open course run by Equality and Diversity UK. If he attended the course and could prove to the RFU's satisfaction that he had completed it, part of the sanction would be suspended. I can report that not only did he complete the course, but he is now evangelical about his wrong and wants to take the opportunity to explain to other players and clubs how what might have been thought, I emphasise what might have been thought, albeit wholly inappropriately, was a joke, was not. He understands the damage it can cause and why it's important not to behave in such a manner. So despite being heavily guided by recommendations of sanctions, there's ample room for some inventive sanctions and effective sanctions involving thinking and advocacy. One aside about that particular panel. One of the panel members was Leon Lloyd, an impressive former player both for England, the Barbarians, Leicester and Gloucestershire. I've sat with Leon many times. He's black, and he contributed to that hearing in a very effective way by simply asking the player, what were you thinking? What was in your mind at the time you pressed the button to send that retweet? Whilst there is no room for complacency in any sport, it was reassuring to hear Leon explaining to the player that he should have considered exactly that as he pressed the button. But Leon then explained that in all his experience in playing as he had done, he could count the racist observations made to him playing rugby on one hand. There is the occasional lighter moment, because of course a lot of it is very serious. In one case, shortly before Christmas, the player arrived for the hearing, dressed, having just completed his firm's charity run, in his Christmas jumper, complete with bells, so every time he moved there was a little jingle. He was charged with tackling the ball carrier and making contact with his head. Unfortunately, despite the responsibility not to make contact with the head, he came off second best. There was an almighty impact when they collided, and he recoiled rather like, as somebody described it, Rudolph on ice. He himself was removed from the game because clearly he'd been concussed. To add to the indignity, he failed to pass the head injury protocol during the week before our hearing. That meant that he was not available for selection that weekend. So the sanction he received couldn't even start on that Saturday because he wasn't fit to play. There's occasionally a flicker that rugby might not be as diverse as it should. Another panel member I've sat with many times is Becky Essex. She's an impressive woman. Occasionally you would see, it's only when she first started sitting, a slight flicker, and these are when the hearings were in person, amongst those who hadn't come across her before and were thinking that she was going to pass judgment or contribute to the judgment upon them. Well, normally what happens is the chair introduces themselves and looks to either side and invites the panel to introduce themselves. Becky simply said, "My name's Becky Essex. I've got 57 caps for England. I've beaten the All Blacks twice and won the World Cup." The flicker rather disappeared once she said that. It's important to consider the impact of whatever you do, your chosen career, but if you do end up doing some sports regulation, considering the long-term impact it has, not just on the player who gets a sanction, but how is it seen from the outside? Even in football, Stacey Crouch, that strong proponent of an independent regulator for English football, appears to accept that once things are in order, that role may be handed back to a revised FA. It appears to me that the real theme that runs through the governance of sport is there needs to be a sound regulatory basis that is applied equally and transparently, dare I say justly. If it is, there is less room for criticism, or perhaps I should say less justifiable criticism. Sport does, after all, excite debate and opinion. Applying the rule of law is a sound basis for regulation, whether it be independent governance or the application of the disciplinary process. As Matthew Syed in the Times said when commenting on those difficulties in Yorkshire and about Sandpapergate and the FA World Cup in the decision to send it to Qatar, said this. And this brings me to a point that is, to my mind, even more important than racism. I'm talking about our faith in due process, the capacity of judicial and quasi-judicial bodies to deliver adjudications that pass some minimum test of credibility. Most right-minded people abhor arbitrary justice. We hate the way that the mob rule of Twitter is encroaching upon the lives and livelihoods of real people, the way that allegations can be magnified by algorithms, to the point when moral precepts, such as the presumption of innocence, seem to be almost quaint in comparison. He felt very strongly that there should be independent regulation that's transparent and that reasons are justified. So whether it be in sport or wherever else you choose to practice. You were very patient and far quieter than the Stretford end would have been had I given a penalty. But I'm very happy to take some questions if we have time for them. You're obviously all very hungry, or thirsty, or both.
No questions. Can I, on behalf of everybody, thank Richard for that excellent talk. You covered a lot of ground and it was brilliant. Thank you very much.